All right, moving on. The last lesson for this unit on genetics is 15.4, Ethics and Impacts of Biotechnology. And our goal is to evaluate the impact of biotechnology on the individual, society, and the environment, including medical and ethical issues. Far side is the guy on Desert Island. Oh my God, an alien comes along. Thank God I'm saved. They leave him and they take the plants. I think I would too, wouldn't you? All right, objectives is to describe some of the issues that relate to biotechnology, identify some of the pros and cons of genetically modified food, and describe some of the ethical issues related to biotechnology. Let's think about it. Years ago, a science fiction movie speculated about the future world in which genetics determines people's ability to get ahead in life. There's all kinds of movies out there like that now. In the movie, schooling, job prospects, and legal rights are rigidly determined by an analysis of the individual's DNA on the day he or she is born. Are we moving closer to this kind of society? Something to think about. Objective 1 describes some of the issues that relate to biotechnology. Monsanto. Private biotechnology and pharmaceutical companies do much of the research involving genetically modified plants and animals. Their goal is largely to develop profitable new crops, drugs, tests, or other products. Like most inventors, they protect their discoveries and innovations with patents, a legal tool that gives an individual company an exclusive right to profit from its innovations for a number of years. Molecules and DNA sequences can be patented. In fact, roughly 1/5 of the known genes in the human genomes are now patented commercially. This graph shows the rise in the number of nucleic acid patents between 1985 and 2005. Some laboratory techniques have also been patented. For example, when a scientist wants to run a PCR test, which is a test for gene expression, as we learned before, he or she must pay a fee for the license to use this process. The ability to patent is meant to spur discovery and advancements in medicine and in industry, but sometimes patent holders demand high fees that block other scientists from exploring certain lines of research. In the case of the development of provitamin A enriched golden rice, patent disputes kept the rice off the hands of farmers for years. And when it comes to your own DNA, how much privacy are you really entitled to? Do you have exclusive rights to your DNA? Should you, like patent holders, be able to keep your genetic information confidential? Lots of questions. The Tomb of the Unknowns in Arlington National Cemetery near Washington, D.C. holds the remains of unknown American soldiers who fought in our nation's wars. In order to avoid more unknown soldiers, the U.S. military now requires all personnel to give a DNA sample when they begin their service. Those DNA samples are kept on file and used, hopefully not needed, to identify the remains of individuals who perish in the line of duty. What if the government wants to use an individual's DNA sample for a criminal investigation or a paternity suit? Should they be allowed to do that? Lots of questions. So what if health insurance providers manage their health care policies based on genetic predisposition or disease? Suppose that years after giving a DNA sample, an individual is barred from employment or rejected for health insurance because of a genetic defect detected in a sample that they gave. Would this be fair and reasonable use of genetic information? So in 2008, the government, let's go back to this picture. I don't know how I got so far ahead. Okay, here we go. The United States passed the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act, which protects Americans against discrimination based on genetic information. Objective 1 describes some of the issues that relate to biotechnology. So what if the government wants to use individuals' DNA for another purpose, like a criminal investigation or a paternity suit? What if health insurance providers manage their healthcare policies based on a genetic predisposition to a disease? Could have a problem with that unless you're the insurance company. Objective 2, identify some of the pros and cons of genetically modified food, GM food. Farmers choose GM crops because they produce higher yields, reducing the amount of land and energy that must be devoted to agriculture, and lowers the cost for food for everyone. Insect-resistant GM plants need little, if any, insecticide to grow successfully. reducing the chance that chemical residue will enter the food supply and lessening damage to the environment. Careful studies of GM foods have provided no significant support for concerns about their safety, and it does seem that foods made from GM plants are safe to eat. Critics do point out that no long-term studies have been made of the hazards of these foods might present. Some worry that the insect-resistant engineering of GM plants may threaten beneficial insects, killing them as well as crop pests. Others express concerns that use of plants' resistance to chemical herbicides may lead to overuse of these weed-killing compounds. Another concern is that patents held on GM seeds by the companies that produce them may prove costly enough to force the small farmers out of business, especially in developing worlds. In the United States, current federal regulations treat GM foods and non-GM foods equally. GM foods are not required to undergo special safety testing before entering the market, which strikes me as odd. No additional labeling is required to identify a product as genetically modified unless its ingredients are significantly different from its conventional counterpart, which also strikes me as odd. The possibility that meat from GM animals may soon enter the food supply has heightened concerns about labeling. And as a result, some states have begun to consider legislation to require the labeling of GM foods, thereby providing consumers with an informed choice, which would seem fair to me. So there are lots of pros and cons of genetically modified food. Careful studies of such food have provided no scientific support for concerns about their safety, and it does seem that they are safe to eat, but consumers should have their choice, I believe. Objective 3. Describe some of the ethical issues relating to biotechnology. So, biotechnology has given us the ability to know ourselves more and more, and with this knowledge, however, comes responsibility. For example, the GFP gene, that remember they got from the jellyfish, it can be easily extracted from the jellyfish and spliced into genes coding for important cellular proteins. This ability has led to significant new discoveries about how cells function. The same GFP technology was used to create fluorescent zebra fish. These fish, along with other fluorescent mice, tadpoles, rabbits, and even cats, have all contributed to our understanding of cells and proteins. But the ability of altered life forms for any purpose, scientific or non-scientific, raises important questions. Just because we have the technology to modify an organism's characteristics, are we justified in doing so? If human cells can be manipulated to cure disease, should biologists try to engineer taller people or change their eye color, the hair texture, their sex, the blood group, or appearance? What would happen to human species when we gain the opportunity to design our bodies or those of our children? What will be the consequences if biologists develop the ability to clone human beings by making identical copies of their cells? These are questions in which society must come to grips. The goal of biology is to gain a better understanding of the nature of life. As our knowledge increases, however, so does our ability to manipulate the genetics of living things, including ourselves. In a democratic nation, all citizens are responsible for ensuring that the tools science has given us are used wisely. We should all be prepared to develop a thoughtful and ethical consensus of what should and should not be done with the human genome. Objective 3 was to describe some of the ethical issues related to biotechnology. Again, just because we have the technology to modify an organism's characteristics, are we justified in doing so? Our objectives in review here are to describe some of the issues related to biotechnology, identify some of the pros and cons of genetically modified food, and describe some of the ethical issues relating to biotechnology. They obviously help support our goal is to evaluate the impact of biotechnology on the individual, society, and the environment, including medical and ethical issues. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes our chapter on genetics. This is the cutest picture of an eel I could find. Yeah, still ugly.